Let me set the scene for you. It's 2004, I'm 7 years old and enjoying the summer holidays off from school playing my PS2. One Saturday morning, my father comes into the sitting room and hands me a videotape, telling me that my uncle had recorded something for me. I didn't think much of it, so I turned off the PlayStation and inserted the tape into the video player. The player slowly started up, and through the grainy static of the screen, the tape began to play. I was immediately intrigued. Who were these larger-than-life, colourful characters I was seeing on the screen? I needed answers, so I kept watching. The show went by in the blink of an eye. Different wrestlers of all shapes and sizes competed over a 3-hour period in an event known as WrestleMania 20. The instant the tape ended, I hit rewind and watched it over and over again, watching the same 3 hours of entertainment over the summer, day in, day out. I was hooked. Summer eventually ended, and when I went back to school, I mentioned to one of my friends about this WrestleMania 20 show I had discovered. And to my amazement, he not only knew what I was talking about, he told me there was more. It had never crossed my small 7-year-old mind that there was more to this. A full organisation of wrestling shows, each one with more matches and more wrestlers. The WWE. I asked my dad if he could get my uncle to record more shows for me. And that's how I experienced wrestling in my early days as a fan. Once a month I would receive a tape with the newest so-called pay-per-view on it. Judgment Day, Backlash, No Mercy, Vengeance, Unforgiven. I couldn't get enough and I wanted more. Staying over at a friend's house one day, I noticed he had Sky Television, hundreds more channels than we had at home. And one of those channels, number 403, was Sky Sports 3. Known for showing sports like football, racing, rugby and golf, late on Friday nights, Sky Sports 3 showed a 2-hour wrestling program known as SmackDown. I said to myself, there's not just one show a month, there's a show every week. Wait, there's also Raw, there's 2 shows a week? This was amazing. I could watch more wrestling than I'd ever know what to do with. There was only one problem. We didn't have Sky at home. Growing up in rural Ireland, we only had access to 3 channels on aerial TV and didn't have any internet access. This meant I had no way to watch weekly wrestling, but at least I still had my monthly tapes to get my fix, right? I was then soon informed by my dad that my uncle in fact had to pay for these monthly pay-per-views and no longer wanted to fork out the €70 a month for them as his own fandom had waned. I was furious. I was an addict and I had no way to get my hit. Every now and then I'd get to see a bit of wrestling at a sleepover, but it was never enough. I felt like my only option was to get Sky at my house. The only problem being that cost money, and as a young boy, I didn't have any. So I began to beg, and beg I did. For months my mother was plagued by my whining to get Sky installed so I could watch wrestling. It took a lot of convincing, but eventually she relented and agreed to pay the monthly fee, and with one phone call, Sky was on the way. We were given a date. It was a school day, so I eagerly sat in my chair, watching the clock tick around over and over again. It seemed like the longest day ever, but eventually it was over, and once the school bus pulled up to my house, I ran inside. I headed straight for our sitting room, picked up our shiny new remote, entered the numbers 403, and I was met with... You had to pay extra to get the Sky Sports bundle. I was devastated. It took months just to get to this point, and there was no way I'd convince my mother to pay more money to add the channels I wanted. I accepted defeat, and I accepted the fact that I was now in a non-wrestling world. So I sat there for weeks, scrolling through a seemingly endless list of channels, but nothing filled that hole in my life. Nothing captured my imagination quite like wrestling. So I settled for game shows on the UK television show Challenge. I always liked game shows, so having a dedicated channel for programs such as Bullseye, Total Wipeout, and my favourite, Takeshi's Castle, was a small consolation. One evening, however, everything changed, because after Takeshi's Castle ended, I was greeted with this.
TNA Wrestling. Cross the line.
This wasn't quite Raw or SmackDown, but it was similar enough. There were wrestlers, there were entrances, there was a ring, even if it had 2 extra sides. This was TNA Wrestling. At the time, I didn't even understand that this wasn't part of WWE, and to be honest, I didn't care. Challenge not only showed the current week-to-week TNA product, but also did reruns of older shows, so there was plenty for me to get my fill. I finally had consistent access to wrestling, and that was enough for me. It was taken away from me before, so I wasn't going to take this for granted. To this day, I can trace the fact that I never completely fell out of love with wrestling with the Challenge network on Sky. It gave me access to TNA Wrestling during some of the best years of that company. As time went on, I became more connected to the rest of the world. We got internet access, had the ability to view more channels, and eventually I found myself in a position where I could watch wrestling shows from not just WWE and TNA, but from all over the world, any time of day, whenever I wanted. With the advent of streaming services like the WWE Network and Fight TV, and the thousands of wrestling YouTube channels that put out quality videos daily, it's never been easier to consume as much wrestling content as I want, even to the point of overconsumption. With access to all of this content, sometimes I find it easy to take it all for granted. But I'll always remind myself to never forget those days of channel surfing, coming across TNA on Challenge, deciding to cross the line, and that saving my love of professional wrestling.